Students, book lovers, professionals, we all want to read more, but it's not just that. We also want to read more effectively. We've all had the experience of drifting off or spacing out while we're reading. We're reading the words, but we just aren't processing the information. I can help you with that. I've been a professor for 15 years. I teach in the Great Books program at St. Thomas University, and I read a lot of books for a living, including some of the longest and most complicated books. What I've found is when you're reading, even if you're reading the really hard stuff like philosophy or classic literature, there are 4 strategies you can use to help you make better use of the time you spend reading and improve your comprehension and retention of even difficult material. Tip 1, start a fight. You want to read actively, maybe even aggressively, definitely not passively. So when you start reading a book, you should be on the lookout for arguments, for things you can disagree with. Be on the lookout for contestable claims, things someone could take issue with. Finding these things either that you disagree with or that a reasonable person could take issue with will help you better track the author's argument. Is the author contradicting themselves? Are they saying something that's just untrue? Look out for generalizations. Is the author making sweeping claims about all people that actually only apply to wealthy white dudes, for example? These strategies really help when we're reading a nonfiction book, something like philosophy, but they can also help us interpret literature too. In a novel, for instance, what perspectives is the author inhabiting? Are there perspectives that are missing from the story? How are we as an audience being positioned? Are we being manipulated or persuaded to view things in a particular way from a particular perspective? Read like a critic. It will keep you on your toes and help with your engagement while reading. Tip 2, lean into the weirdness. Books are weird. This is especially true if you're reading older classic books or works of philosophy. Those things are filled with strange images and odd arguments. Let me give you an example of this from a famous Greek tragedy called Antigone. Now, in this play, Antigone, she's outraged because the body of her brother has not been buried. Her brother died in battle, and he hasn't been given proper funeral rites, arguably because he's a traitor, but Antigone is understandably outraged. And early in the play, she says this: "I will bury him myself, and even if I die in the act, that death will be a glory. I will lie with the one I love and loved by him, an outrage sacred to the gods." So Antigone loves her brother, and she wants to lie down in a grave with him and be loved by him. That's a weird thing to say. An outrage sacred to the gods. What does that mean? And your instinct when you see things like this might just be to say, well, that's weird, and just keep turning the page. But this is where you lean into the weirdness. When you see an odd image or something strange, make a note of it. Fold down that page, pause in your reading and think about it for a minute. Focusing on the weird elements of a book will really help with your retention. It's easier to remember things that are weird than things that are ordinary. But also, in my experience, trying to unravel those really twisted, strange images can lead you to really interesting ideas and unique interpretations. Sometimes you'll encounter someone making arguments and their conclusions don't seem to follow from the argument, or maybe there's a discrepancy between what an author is saying and what an author is doing. In Plato's Republic, for instance, Socrates imagines an ideal city, and he famously says, well, in order to keep the city just, we have to banish the poets. But then Socrates quotes the poets all the time in his own teaching. That's weird. Just identifying these odd discrepancies can be the first step to reading more deeply and understanding these really complex texts more fully. Okay, number 3 is just a practical tip. Annotate your books. By annotate, I just mean mark up your books. You've got to mark up your books. I'm a professor. This is what my books look like. Just cover to cover graffiti. If you're a student, this is going to help you write essays. It's going to help with preparing for exams. Some people have a hard time with this. They think of their books as like sacred objects, and I get it. I love books, but books are your tools. You are using them to build a more interesting living space inside of your head. So you want to enter into conversation with your books, mark them up, use pens or markers, highlighters. I like to use multiple colors. I find that keeps me more engaged. If you really struggle, you really can't bring yourself to mark on your books, then try using flags. Flags. If you can't afford flags, then just buy some cheap sticky notes and cut them up into pieces, and there you go, cheap flags. Tip 4, read and read again. So one thing you notice as a professor is you often have occasion to reread reread books, these books you've read before. And what you find is every time you read them, you understand them better. Maybe you understand or you see something new you never saw before. So one of the best ways to improve your reading comprehension, your understanding of a text, is just to read it again. So this doesn't mean you have to read the whole thing twice. You don't have time for that. So probably not, but the things you should focus on those passages you've annotated. This is why annotating is so valuable. You can go back to the most interesting or important passages. Also focus on those sections that you thought were weird or strange. These are probably key moments in the text, so revisit those sections. I would also encourage you to spend time rereading the beginning of books after you've finished the book or you've digested a chunk of it. Now that you're familiar with the argument or the way the narrative works, go back to the beginning. What you'll often find is that beginning looks different than it did before. You'll probably notice things you didn't notice the first time. Like I said, I teach Integrate Books program, so if you're wondering what books you should read, or you're interested in philosophy or classic literature and you're wondering where should I start, you should check out this video over here. I will see you there. Talk to you soon.